Welcome to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we dig in deep to analyze the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. I'm Andy Nelson from thenextreel.com.
And I'm Pete Wright, also from thenextreel.com.
All right, Pete, we are going back to the beginning, to where it all started 10 years ago. We are talking about Jon Favreau's 2008 film, Iron Man, the movie that kicked off this whole thing. On today's episode, we dig into minute 1, which starts with the Paramount logo and ends with a convoy of U.S. military jeeps driving through Afghanistan.
Can we start by just talking about those logos? There was a feeling. Now, the way the movie starts, it's, in our first minute, it's probably 3 or 4 seconds of black before we get our first introduction to the logo, and we see the stars flying in. And I remember this visceral feeling, being just really excited to see that Paramount logo. But I got very excited for some reason seeing our transition into the flipbook Marvel logo. It was it just felt like it was introducing something really big to me. And I felt like a kid. That I was ready for something that they were going to take me on a journey that was going to be much bigger than me.
And it's interesting because, I think Paramount, they oftentimes, the movies, they allow their logo to like have some color tinting with it and stuff. I can't quite tell if this is tinted. It looks pretty close, but it feels, maybe it's just the really kind of subtle hint of kind of a musical hum or something and some wind blowing behind. And then the comics start flipping. There's no music or anything. It's just kind of the flipping. And it's kind of nice to just have that comic flipping in the background of the Marvel logo, which is not how they've always done it, but it's nice to see here. It's
in its purest form. And this was not the first time we'd seen the flipbook logo. The flipbook logo, its first appearance for us was in Spider-Man back in, when was that?
2002.
2002. So it's not as if we hadn't been living with this, but I guess my sense is, looking at the flipbook logo here, it felt like a title of ownership, whereas the flipbook logo for Spider-Man, knowing that it was coming from, Columbia and Sony, it just felt like a borrowed title. This just felt more resonant to me.
Well, and that's funny because, technically, it was kind of the same thing. It was, Marvel had been trying to find a home, I guess you could say, the right place to make their films. And obviously, as we know, they had sold a number of their titles to Sony, like Spider-Man and those franchises. And I shouldn't say sold, they've licensed them over to them. Universal has Hulk, which they've had for ages. And they've been trying different studios, trying to set up deals with them. Before they came to Paramount, back in the early aughts, I think around 2004, they were with New Line, working with Nick Cassavetes, trying to get this film off the ground, a different version of the script entirely. And it never quite came to pass, and it fell out of New Line's hands, and then they ended up coming to Paramount. And as we are going to discuss over the course of this whole series, Marvel is going to be, this is not quite their home yet. It's nice seeing them with the Paramount logo, but they have not quite found their permanent home.
And that's fair. I have a feeling much of this conversation is going to be weighted with the gift of hindsight. That now we know how far we've come. And so this feels, much more resonant in my memory than it probably was. And yet it still is different. It's a different tone. Can you even imagine what this movie would have been like in the hands of Nick Cassavetes and New Line? Can you even begin to? It might as well have been, a 2018 A24 movie.
Right. Yeah. Nick Cassavetes seems, he seemed like just a strange choice to hear. As
was it okay? Here's the thing: would it have been any stranger in Nick Cassavetes' hands than Spider-Man in Sam Raimi's?
Well, yes, it would have been, because I don't think he had ever directed anything like this. The film that he had directed immediately before, when he was working on this, was The Notebook, and that's
okay,
completely different. He had done Unhook the Stars, She's So Lovely, John Q, and The Notebook. And then after it fell out of his hands, then he did Alpha Dog, My Sister's Keeper, Yellow, and The Other Woman. And he's got some, and that was 2014. He's got projects that he's developing and in pre-production, but he hasn't actually done anything since. As far as a director, I mean, he's acted plenty. He's been also acting quite a bit, but I just don't see him as the guy who was going to be meant to helm this film. And so I think in the end, it probably worked in Marvel's favor that that didn't happen, because I kind of don't think he would have been the guy to bring the MCU into the place that it is now.
We would probably be on our third reboot of the Iron Man franchise.
Exactly.
By now.
Yes, right. And people going, God, it's just like Fantastic Four. They just can't get these right.
Right, exactly. That's where we would have been. But this film felt different. After we get through the flip book, the Iron Man centric flip book, getting our little visual tour, our trip down memory lane, that brings us up into a very different sense of place than we might expect. A wide open landscape shot with the convoy in the distance, kicking up dust, driving through what looks to be a high arid desert, an ominous and empty land.
It is. It's very empty with snowy peaks in the distance. And I have stared at this image, I can't tell you how often, trying to figure out if those snowy peaks are CG'd in there or if they are real snowy peaks. I kind of doubt they're snowy because it's filmed in California, in I think it's Lone Pine, California. But they do have the Alabama hills there, and a lot of films have filmed there. And looking at pictures, it looks like it could be mountainous. I just don't know if it ever would be snowy. And that was the question I had as I looked at this.
Right. They are calling it Kunar Province, Afghanistan, which is, for those who were uninitiated in Iron Man lore, that might not be where you would expect to open a movie like this.
Yeah, not exactly. The film actually, or the story in the comics, I guess jumping back, the Iron Man's first appearance was in Tales of Suspense number 39, which came out March 10th, 1963. And in that comic, he is working with the military and he is developing stuff for them in South Vietnam in the jungle. And nearby, the villagers are being menaced by Wong Chu, the red gorilla tyrant, and that is the person who ends up capturing Tony in the comics. But here we are taking liberties with the story and making it a little more current and putting him in Afghanistan. I think it works.
Oh, it certainly works for me. It works to modernize the story. It works to put us in a place that we can. I mean, we have been seeing images like this on television for more than a decade at this point, and getting a sense of what the military looks like and feels like. And this felt right at home.
Yeah, it really did. It just feels like stuff you're seeing on the news. So yeah, absolutely, It works in that context. We should jump back just briefly and talk about Jon Favreau, because one credit we didn't mention that we do see on screen is in association with Fairview Entertainment, which is Jon Favreau's company. And that's the company that, as a production company, when he's making projects, the films that he's directing and producing end up with that credit. And so like his TV show Dinner for Five had that, Iron Man 2, Cowboys and Aliens, The Jungle Book, and then the two projects that he's developing right now, The Lion King and Jungle Book 2.
Is Jon Favreau the guy you would have expected behind the camera on this one?
The film that he did preceding this was that the adaptation of the kids' book, Zathura.
Right.
And I guess that might have been the thing that gave him the leg up. It seemed like an odd choice to pick him. And I remember hearing him and going, oh, really? He did... I mean, I knew him from back when he was acting, and I saw, I guess as a actor-writer, way back when he did Swingers in the mid-90s. And then directing, I had seen Elf, which I love. I had seen Maid, which I hated. And then I knew he directed Zathura, but it just was kind of past the point in life where I was going to go watch that movie. So I missed it, but it looked like, he handled it capably. And my recollection was it got reviews that were fair. And so I was like, oh, it seems like an odd choice, but it seemed like a safe choice, I guess.
Well, safe in the spirit of making budget. Made was budgeted, and I'm getting this from Wikipedia, and I don't have the other budget in front of me, but, Made is, says it was budgeted 5 million, gross 5 million. Zathura budgeted 65 million, gross 64 million. Now, Elf, before that, back in 2003, was budgeted 33 million and came in at 220. So obviously a significant performer at the box office and has become a cultural staple. So if anything, to have this guy know the humor and land the humor is it's a significant contribution. And obviously that ended up being a significant contribution to Iron Man and the character of Iron Man and the sort of what the tone of the films that would come. But it felt like a strange pick to me, insofar as we've gotten strange picks since. But boy, it worked out.
Yeah, I think that he really does a great job here. And I think right away we get a great nod that, at least for me, I felt like I was in good hands, because I thought it was just so clever that we see this convoy off in the distance. We hear the wind whispering away, and then it cuts to a great long lens shot of these Humvees coming right at us down the road. I will say, I felt like I was in very good hands, though, because I thought it was very clever. We have the Black Sabbath song, Iron Man, with the I Am Iron Man, and it's that great kind of heavy metal song that just, there's something about it that feels right for a guy walking around in a suit of armor. But instead of using that song, we kick in with AC/DC's Back in Black, which it's a totally different song, but it still had that great kind of just that heavy metal vibe that I thought worked so well to really get things started here.
Well, and that's really it. I mean, just saying the words heavy metal now feels so associated with Iron Man. The weight of the suit, the size of the mechanics that are working, and that we open on this fighting force crossing across, the desert with their guns at the ready and the big Humvees. It just feels so, foundational, so heavy, and gives us a real sense of, feels like we're listening to it in the car or in the trucks with them.
Yeah, which we will find out soon enough that they just might be. Right?
I don't know. I'm not allowed to talk about minutes that we haven't seen yet.
We're only in this minute.
Yeah, you're already breaking your own rule.
I know I am. But
Please don't cut this. That's important that we know you made that rule.
We made the rules. First episode of the show, I'm already breaking my rules. So like me. It is so like me.
We live in our own little character suits.
As you mentioned, we are in the Kunar province of Afghanistan, which is up in the northeastern part of the country. Capital is Asadabad, and it is way up there. So if you look at the map, it is like right on the border.
It's on the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan, right? That's where we are, and we're outside of looks like. I want to say striking distance. That doesn't seem like an appropriate term for a guy like me to use, of Kabul, which is, obviously the center of a great deal of conflict. So we're setting ourselves up for, for knowing exactly what we might be doing there in this first minute. And that leads us to a bit of a context shock in the minutes to come.
It's going to be an interesting exploration here, putting it in real world context of Middle East wars and crises, paired with the comic book version of stuff that had been happening in Iron Man. Because as we know, in the comic book, it was kind of put into a real situation, Vietnam. Obviously there was a lot of talk of commies and all this sort of stuff, but it'll be interesting to see as the film progresses, who are they going to tie into this? And so it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out over the rest of the minutes.
Well, and look at how expert that is, right? These choices, these screenplay choices, or screenwriting choices, to actually open with something that is resonant and newsworthy, right? A place that is so clear to us, to give us an entree to a universe, right? This Marvel cinematic, soon-to-be universe of superheroes, and grounded in something that we can all rationalize, we can normalize into our well-being that yes, into our worldview that yes, these things exist. If this exists, then surely guys like Tony Stark exist. And if Tony Stark exists, then surely that some of the technology that fuels him exists. And if that technology exists, then surely this suit has to exist, right? And the equation, right, the logical math that they have presented to us, it checks out and allows us to buy in emotionally. And I think that is the strength of this movie. And that is the thing that gets us into it, allows us to buy into the entire universe to come and make some very grounded assumptions and assertions about every film that, in this universe. And it all starts right here in this first minute. And I think that is genius.
Marvel has always been good about finding the ground to develop their stories with. I know it's something that DC has struggled with a little bit more, but I think Marvel, a lot of people say this, where Marvel's characters are people first and superheroes, that's kind of something that they turn into. And in the DC universe, it seems like they're superheroes first, and then they have to adopt this human facade. And it makes it more of a challenge to connect with them. And I think that what's interesting about Marvel is they've found a great way to do it in their films as well. And even the films that we've seen before this that aren't necessarily connected directly to the MCU, I think they still manage to do that for the most part in their stories. I mean, certainly some of them struggle more than others, but I think that they have found a good way to do it. And I think it's really strong here. And I think that the way that they decided to put this together with Kevin Feige and Jon Favreau and the writing team, they've found a good foundation. And what's so interesting to me is that Iron Man was never one of the big characters. I mean, he's always been kind of a big character in the comic books. He was one of the members of the Avengers, and I mean, all the stuff that we have seen, it's really because of him in the comics. But Spider-Man was always kind of like their number one character, and the Hulk was always big. And what's interesting, at the time in the late 90s, early 2000s, when they were talking about developing this as a film, they were really nervous about getting people interested in Iron Man and even knowing who he was, especially young kids who didn't really, the character was just not one of the popular ones anymore. And so I find what's interesting is that Marvel actually hired Tim Miller, who we know later for directing Deadpool, to do these, what they called advertorials, which were these little short CG films that, or mini films, like short films that he put together with Marvel to kind of help people get a sense of who Iron Man was. And it's really these advertorials. I mean, you can watch them on YouTube. We'll have to put the links up. They did these 3 animated shorts with a simple story to introduce Iron Man to younger viewers. And they had to use Spider-Man and Hulk, who are the 2 most recognizable characters, as bait to get people to watch this. And as Tim Miller said, the marching orders were to, 1, clearly demonstrate that there was a man inside the armor, because a lot of people seem to think that it was just a robot. Number 2, show off his wide range of cool powers. And number 3, position him clearly as a hero on the same level as Spidey and Hulk, and having those characters show how cool they perceive him to be and valued him as a peer.
Right. And they're amazing. When you look at them, you want to see more of these stories. And they give you, what Miller did here is they give you all of those. They make good on all of those promises, right? Showing the man in the suit. They show the complicated machinery that Tony had to build to piece the suit together on his body. And I think they're really terrific. They really set the stage.
What I think is fun is that they turned out so well, and they were really popular that they're like, hey, we should do the same thing for Thor, because we're going to be making a movie with him soon. But they realized that making him was actually really more of a challenge than they planned, and they really couldn't get them distributed as good as they wanted to, and just didn't end up putting the money into it. So, but I think by the time they got this out there, people started feeling like they could trust what was going on. And even if they couldn't see the scope of this entire universe that we have the luxury of having been through so far, I think that it allowed people to start trusting them and to start buying in as things developed.
Yeah, back to the minute, just in terms of building us a gateway movie, a gateway property to get us into this universe of superheroes that has, come to thrive. You've got to earn your aliens. DC struggles with that because their central character is an alien already. You've got to earn your wizards. You've got to earn, you've got to earn your monsters and things. And this movie gives us, it shows us what, human monsters are, and it gives us we can relate to that. And, it all starts with this minute right here.
Now, Pete, what is your history with Marvel and the comics and the movies and Iron Man?
So with the comics, I read some of the comics when I was a kid. I never really, I was never one of those kids who, drank all of the comics in, all of the Marvel comics in. I made the wrong choice when I was a kid. And I decided that it wasn't going to be Avengers superheroes. It was going to be Transformers, right? And, I regret that a little bit because I feel like it's taken me more study to get up to speed on what these characters are and what their backstories are as these movies have come out. Since then, I have read quite a few of them, and I've tried to get back into the fold, so to speak. And so the last 10 years, I've read quite a bit, but I have to say, I have not read as many as you have. I am so impressed by what you have done over the last, 60 days? Have you read all of the Marvel comics?
I've read the entire library.
Everything they've done
every
in the last
comic.
60 years.
1 year a day.
Right.
That's what I've done. No, well, it's funny because growing up, I was definitely a comic book reader, but I was the sort of kid who really loved the more juvenile sort of stuff. Like I really enjoyed the Transformers. I think I collected probably the first 3 years of those comics. But I bought comics like, I would see things like Wolverine and Iron Man and the Avengers on the shelves, but I would normally not gravitate to them because, they just seemed like, much more adult than my little brain was looking for at the time. And so I was going to things like Droids and Top Dog and Captain Carrot and much sillier comics.
And Carrot. That's why you're still a big Captain Underpants reader today.
Oh, hey, absolutely. No, I have a very wide variety of strange comic choices that I've been saving all these years. And I think part of it is I liked feeling like I got a sense of the whole story. Like Transformers, I really enjoyed because I was able to pick up issue number 1 and start that journey with them. I would get 4-issue limited series. Like I got the Nightcrawler 4-issue limited series. I got, weirdly enough, before anybody knew who he was, I got the Rocket Raccoon 4-issue limited series. I picked up, a lot of those because it was my opportunity to just get a whole story and get a sense of what was happening within that world. And I think sometimes I would pick up a comic, like I have a random Uncanny X-Men comic, and I have no idea what's happening in the comic because it's like mid-story. I don't know who these characters are. It always drops the little, when something happens, it does the little asterisk underneath and it says, check out issue so-and-so for this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know where I can even find this information because this was way pre-internet or anything. And there's no way to track this stuff down.
And then you feel terrible because you realize you're not a true believer.
That's exactly what it was. That's exactly what it was. But I still loved reading comics. And so I bought a bunch, but again, they were very random. And Spider-Man was the one that I really collected. True to Marvel's word, Spidey was the one who was in my life. But Iron Man never was. I think I got the first couple issues of the West Coast Avengers when that started, and he popped up in that, and I'm sure he was in some of my Spider-Man comics. But otherwise, I had no familiarity with the character. I just knew he was out there, and not a lot of interest. But as you said, because of these movies, I've really it fluctuated with my enjoyment of the MCU, but I find that as I kind of continue rewatching them, I actually find my enjoyment of them growing rather than diminishing, which isn't always the case in movies. I really find myself connecting with it more and more. And so, yeah, knowing that we were going to do this, I did start reading Iron Man comics, and I have plowed through a ton of them. I've read, the first, I don't know how many years of the Tales of Suspense. And then when I think it went up to 99 and then started with the Invincible Iron Man, and number 100 was basically when he got his own title. And I read a number of those, and I've been reading a lot of the stories, trying to get a sense of what I needed as a grounding for this show. Like I read all the stuff with Obadiah Stane, which was a good, man, that was a hefty chunk of time that ran, because I think it was like 40 issues or something like that, maybe 30. And that's all the time when Tony was an alcoholic and he was living on the streets. And Rhodey was actually the one who was in Iron Man for, probably years of in comic book time as far as the monthly issues. So, yeah, I've been really digging in, and I've really been enjoying it. And I've been kind of rekindling my love of comics and these movies through all of it.
I think that's fantastic. And I've not read nearly maybe a fraction of what you've read, and so I'm really excited for you to continue to sort of teach, particularly where these things part, where the properties part ways. So I think this is super exciting. The movies have been a great gateway for me to get back into the comics as appropriate. And I try to read the stuff that the actors would have read to prepare them for each story. So that gives me a little bit more background to talk about. We obviously have talked about some of these things on our the main Next Reel show. And so that has been another interesting gateway for me to get back into these from the perspective of the movies. But this is going to be a whole new gig, this movie by minute thing.
It is. It's going to be a fun journey, just digging into the minutia and the details of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So that is it for today's show, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe to the show for free over at marvelmovieminute.com. Join us over on our Discord chat room, and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Next Reel. And if you like what we do and want to support us and get some cool stuff, become a patron over at patreon.com/thenextreel. Thanks, everybody.